All right, first of all, look, I just want to say thanks to everyone for joining today. Look, it's worth noting that a lot of us have started our businesses really as lifestyle businesses, and there isn't really a huge desire to scale or grow from a headcount perspective, at least not right now. For me, look, I have a young family. I'm the breadwinner. The reason I've started this business really was to replace my salary, replace my partner's salary, and hopefully make a little bit more for us. So what I'm trying to say, I guess, is some of us aren't really interested right away in scaling, but it doesn't mean that it's not the case down the line. Now, hopefully, if you are in a scaling phase or you're considering it, you will get some real value from this on how to do it right. What we'll cover off is conversations that are actually backed by industry insights and industry conversations that I've had with people that are looking to grow and scale their teams, what they did really well, what didn't work out for them, and what they could do if they did it again. So, look, can I get everyone to send a message in the chat and just kind of say if there was any challenges they've had or anything that they've had in the past? I think what we'll do is I've left some time at the end for Q&As where we can kind of cover off this. Now, that being said, if anyone does have any questions along the way, please feel free to jump in and ask. More than happy to be interrupted and challenged throughout the process. Now, yeah, and look, one last thing, if you want to reflect on these processes that you've done in the past, feel free to put them in there. So it's good to see some faces that I recognise, and for everyone else, I just wanted to give you a really brief overview of myself and what's brought me to doing this. So I actually fell into recruitment. Not really many people aspire to do it, if we're being honest. I did a business degree in the UK and really specialised in accounting finance there. Didn't really end up doing much with the HR and the marketing side. But fast forward a few years, I've moved over to Sydney and I'm working in construction. I'm doing sort of odd jobs here and there. And I landed my first proper gig, my first professional full-time role, which was with Tesla Motors. I was working in car sales there and I did that for about a year. And then I was let go as part of the 10% of the workforce that I got let go nationally. And I just happened to find a job in recruitment. Within about 3 weeks, I was recruiting bankers for NAB and ANZ. Started off with the really low-level ones, and then I moved up to sort of doing your relationship associates, complex lending associates, and some of the frontline lending roles in the branches with ANZ too. I decided I actually wanted to go into banking and lending myself specifically, but I didn't have the permanent residency at the time, and it made it quite hard with the family. So what I did was I ended up looking for jobs elsewhere, and I got a job with Loan Market Group, recruiting for their broker network. This was where my eyes were really opened, I guess, to a different world, a different way of doing things. And I quickly realised that I didn't want to work in corporate and I wanted to run something for myself. And this actually led me to thinking, why don't I become a broker myself? Look, I quickly looked at the market. I noticed there was 20,000 brokers and counting. Coming in with no experience, I think I've got all the right credentials from the relationship management and the drive, and as well as the activity perspective. But I think for a lot of people, it is the most expensive thing they'll ever buy, and I didn't feel right doing that without the knowledge, the prior knowledge. So I looked at the market and I said, you know what? There is a real opportunity for recruitment. It's an industry that's going to consolidate in the future, and I think growing my business out to be a real strategic partner is where I guess where my interests lied. So I started to build FinTalent out in the background, and what happened to be a 2 to 3 year business ended up coming on a lot sooner. So here we are. Now, look, to give you a quick overview of the Prezzo, we're going to briefly cover onshore versus offshore, running a real solid hiring process, some REM and retention strategies, and what you should do if it goes wrong. Okay, I don't want to talk too much time speaking about onshore, but it is worth it really, I think, to contextualize, because for some business, it is a nice to have rather than a must have, and why people choose offshore. So cost savings, look, especially at the start, is number one. One thing I hated when I was recruiting for the banks is they would, say, oh, it's efficiency or it's this and that. Like, come on, we're not daft. It was always saving costs. Scalability. So for a lot of brokers, the ability to expand these teams' capacity quickly without the same local hiring constraints really get them to go offshore. With the roles, they are process driven in nature, right? So you can't have somebody doing something they're not hired to do. They won't go off, I guess, script or off process, but it is really good for businesses that run a real repetitive, one-touch sort of, I guess, streamlined service and a streamlined process. A big one as well is 24/7 productivity. So, you can get some really, really solid operators out of South Africa. A broker I know up in Brizzy actually has all of her offshore team working there, and they do different shifts throughout the day with the 12 p.m. till actually, sorry, 8, I think it goes 12 p.m. till 8 p.m. at night is covered from someone over there. So what that essentially does for her is it means that after hour stuff that could be done is being collected by this person, which is great. Now, our last one is just freeing up onshore talent. So a lot of the aggregators do have their own on-demand programs, on-demand offshore services. And what this really does is it allows the onshore talent to free up time. If someone, who's sick or goes on holiday or whatever it is in a small and lean business, it really allows that flexibility to come in and help out. So look, this slide ended up actually being surplus to requirements, if I'm being quite honest. I did spend a fair time on it though, so I thought I may as well just leave it in there. So these are, of course, the most common offshoring companies we have. Now, the behemoths being the Philippines and Nepal. I think Nepal's quickly becoming a market leader. They've got an excellent candidate base over there, but there's also two namely big brokerages over here that have built functions off there and are training these people up. So I think it's become I think it's really on the way up to being, I guess, tackling the Philippines for #1 spot. One thing is, a lot of them have the intention to move over to Australia as well. I think there's a closer cultural alignment, in my opinion, than the Philippines. So if you catch someone really good quite early on in their journey and you're interested in sponsoring them to come over, it's probably something that they're open to doing, right? So it's a real good way of nurturing talent from early on. South Africa and Fiji, Vietnam as well, they're all actually more emerging markets. So with the onshore versus offshore, realistically, they both do serve a solid purpose, right? And I've seen brokerages run models with one, the other, or a hybrid of the two really efficiently. I think you have to listen to your client base and sort of reverse engineer it from there. Let's say you're running a high volume, low touched, personalized but seamless service. Majority offshore and AI workflows might really suit you best. If you're working with high net worth, complex borrowers, or even small businesses, you're probably going to want to have someone local who gets it, but also has more accountability to make decisions with your trust. It's funny, actually. So there's a business that I used to recruit for in my LMG days up in Bendigo. Essentially, he trialed offshore and he realized that the connection piece with his onshore clients just really wasn't there. And it was kind of hard for them to build that relationship. So, they sort of needed, my cousin went to that school or lives in that area because it's a regional place and they needed that relationship. So he decided that he was going to pivot to using just onshore for that relationship. One thing I also say as well is offshore can stretch the box. Now, I don't like to say think outside the box, because how far outside the box can you think until ASIC come knocking, right? But thinking on stretching the box is something that you can rely on onshore people to do. So I think that's why they're more of a credible source. Look, here's the reasons why I think that they are a game changer. So if scaling up as a business, as an organization, and not just a really high income, self-employed gig is your goal, you're not going to be able to do it with offshore. It's a fact. You could give it a really good go, but I'm probably going to run yourself into the ground. Now, something I tell those looking to make those first hires onshore is you should be able to trust offshore to do their job, but you should trust onshore to do a little bit more. And what I mean by that really is, again, going back to that thinking and stretching the box, right? Now, down the track, if you want to grow in a way where you can somewhat step away from time to time and leave the business running, essentially becoming an operational head with loan writers, a team under you, bringing somebody onshore who you can develop into an operations manager, credit manager style role is a really great way to set that in motion. The key here is you have to trust people and you have to be willing to relinquish ownership, even if it's uncomfortable at the start. So I've seen so many businesses run with a huge bottleneck, right? And it could be them 7, 8, 15 years into business. The reality is they never trusted anyone to really relinquish and take ownership, and kind of hurting a bit with it now. Look, and if you do opt for this hybrid onshore-offshore model, a really smart thing to do is to get your offshore team member to manage the onshore team member to manage the offshore team. What it does is, and it will lean into this sort of development later on, but it gives them responsibility to feel like they're really on the journey with you, apart from, aside from just being another cog in the wheel, right? From the what's in it for you perspective, though, development is the opportunity to bring somebody on that journey that's continuously growing, enhances the business and adds to the growth, right? That could be, for example, a junior kid that you bring in, you train them up all the way from being a loan processor, CSM, to being a fully fledged broker. Now, naturally, it is a lot easier to do that with the onshore presence. Flexibility as well is another one. So again, going back to stretching the box, sometimes you are going to need employees to pivot and do something outside of their original day-to-day, right? So let's say it's a credit analyst who was brought in to just package and structure, actually going out and doing some MIR calls, follow-ups with the stakeholders that they weren't supposed to be doing. You could probably get away with asking them for doing that for a little bit of time. You can't really do that with offshore, right? So here is the mindset I think people need to really get into when they're hiring. It's something that I see a lot of people neglecting. So when you are first building it out, the job spec needs to be from the angle of it doesn't need to be, I need help. It needs to be, in theory, that is what you want, right? I know it's that you need help, but if you think like that, you're just going to end up building a checklist for today's problems, not solving the issues that might arise down the line. Instead, you want to, again, think about those future challenges that might come up. And at the end of the day as well, you are, I guess, part of this person's career. So do you want to just be another business on a resume, or do you actually want to be a leader and someone develops them and gets a real solid return on investment for you as well? With businesses, small businesses specifically, the founder is the culture, right? So when you bring somebody in that looks like you and sounds like you, yeah, it's a culture fit, but you're not adding and growing the culture. I think adding the culture is a lot more important very early on. And let's be honest, as founders, we're not that great. There's lots of gaps that we have that we could fill. So why not get those people in that fill those gaps and absolutely outperform us in different places? Defining the role is simple, right? So you have to deliver what you're selling and promising. Don't change the role throughout the process or when they start. You're probably going to end up losing them if you do. And the last one is understanding and building out your EVP. So this requires a lot of deep thinking and strategy. For those who haven't heard that word before, EVP is your employee value proposition. So it's essentially how businesses and how employees would view you. So that's a good place to start. Think about how your internal employees and people external would look at the business and view it. What we're going to get onto now is how to run a really structured process, right? And it's a structure that I use within my business. So what most brokerages do, they'll post an ad on Seek, they'll check it quite sporadically, they'll jump to the best candidate, but those best candidates, they're sat in the process of about 3, 4, 5 other businesses, and they also might be dealing with recruiters as well. So what you're doing there is you're dealing with a candidate who's probably dealing with multiple businesses, and you could end up losing them, right? So they're going to get snapped up. Another thing as well is there is no urgency or structure, so you end up losing momentum through the process. You meet somebody on Monday, have a coffee, don't get them in until next Friday, right? That's not going to work. So the hiring process needs to have the same clarity and urgency, I guess, as well, that you'd give to winning new clients. So this is the 100-10-3 methodology that I use within the business, and ultimately it does deliver that one hire at the end. So what you're going to want to do is source as close to 100 good candidates as you can. This could be LinkedIn, Seek, referrals, and your network as well. The goal here is volume, so you can filter down effectively. What you're going to do then is long list 10 really, really strong profiles. These meet the base requirements and are worth advancing further into the process, which we'll get into in the next slide. You're then going to shortlist the best 3. Chosen based on technical capability, cultural fit, and alignment with the business's growth plans. And from there, you're going to make really one great hire. Now, it's someone who's not technically sound, but they're also committed to the journey and delivering that long-term value within the business too. It's not just about collecting resumes here, right? It's about moving from the many to the few with structure and momentum. And, look, time is our currency, right? This is about putting the minimum time in to get the maximum results. Each stage should increase the odds of getting a good hire and who sticks around and performs in the business. Now, one last side note I want to add is when you are putting your ad together, make sure you put your salary range on there. People don't usually apply to uncertainty. They want to be knowing what they're getting, how they're valued. And a further note to that as well is try and be really tactile with the salary range that you put. So if you put 60 to 80, what you're going to end up subconsciously doing is telling that 80K person that you might actually lowball them when they come in. So don't do that. So let's move on to the actual process, the structure, the process of how you interview people. So what I say is start with a phone screen, and I would phone screen the best 10 people. And even do this if you're hiring directly or not. So even if you get a referral from your network or your aggregator or you use a recruiter, for example, still pick up the phone and have that initial phone call first, right? And treat it as a rapport building exercise. You want to keep it really light and talk through common interests, let the conversation flow, right? Talk about footy or interest that you have, right? Whatever it is. But whilst it is casual, it does have purpose, and you want to use it to assess how easy they can connect and build rapport. What other roles they're interviewing for? This is a big one. Whereabouts they are in those other processes, because this information tells you if they're a real contender or you're just wasting your time, right? The goal is to identify good prospects, build trust, and spark interest in the role. Now, the second stage of the process is a face-to-face interview. What you want to do is pitch first, assess second. And what I mean by that is you need to sell the role and then kind of grill, and not fully grill the candidate, but that's where your questioning and things that you want to uncover from them come into it, right? So many hiring managers and business owners will go straight to assessment, but your priority really first is to sell the role. So for the first 10 minutes, share the role, share your business, share the vision. What does success look like at 30, 60, and 90 days? And you can use these success metrics to inspire, right? So don't say things like by week 2, you'll be making 15 cold calls a day. What you want to say is by week 2, we're going to have you really confident and ready to go out there and start building relationships yourself. It makes them feel like they're not just joining, they're joining a growth journey, not just filling a seat, right? Make it relevant as well. So think about when you was in that position where you were choosing your aggregator. What you ended up doing is you went with the one that ticked all your boxes and the one that made you feel the most supported. So for candidates, it's no different, right? Position your business as a place they're going to come into and thrive. And then from there, you move on to the more assessment phase of the interview, right? So ask situational questions that use and test their ability and apply their knowledge in real scenarios. What you're going to do as well is consider practical examples, right? So you could have dummy deals, financials, or even case studies for them that they can work on and kind of give you an understanding of where they're at. Be specific and clear as well throughout the process. So if a candidate leaves and they've got more questions than they do answers, they're probably likely to disengage. The key principle here is every stage should either increase the candidate's excitement for the role or confirm they're the right fit for your business. If you nail both of these as well, like the chances of landing a really good person at the end are almost, it's almost guaranteed. That being said, stuff does happen. Now, let's understand the principles of what people are looking for today. And before we get into really pay-based discussions, let's see what people are just looking for, right? So it's no surprise flexibility with working is number one. Now, if you are anti-work from home, humour me a little bit here. Work from home is only one side of flexibility. The reality is when I speak to people, what they really want is flexibility to, pardon me, not have to start bang on 8 or 9 and finish at 5 or 6. Like what they want to be able to do is have the flexibility to drop the kids off at school, to have the freedom to do some tasks after hours, as we all do ourselves as business owners. Look, I understand as well, looking at these, aside from flexibility and some additional annual leave, the rest are more typical of larger organizations. But these aren't really the only way you can add value to the employees and their package, and we can talk about that later down the line in the retention strategies. So look, in this saturated and competitive market, knowing the current salary expectations is essential for securing the best people. Salaries typically range based on experience, entry-level positions starting at a competitive rate these days just to get good people in, even at the start, because you are going to be dealing with graduates, whatever it might be. That EVP, going back to that, is crucial. So this encompasses the unique benefits and opportunities offered right within the business, such as career development, work-life balance, and a positive company culture that aligns with your candidate's values. And your EVP is something that you can very consciously and deliberately design, but there are also parts of it that just exist as a matter of fact, right, where your business is at the moment. So if you're running a long-standing business, let's say, you've got great branding processes, marketing, back-end support, the full shebang, you're not going to have to pay a premium to get someone in the door. You probably will still do though, because you can, right? However, if you are a one-man band, you've got everything in place from a process perspective, but it seems a bit more of a risk to an employee. You're probably going to end up having to cough up a little bit more just to get that good person over the line. And I would always say doing that, especially if it's a gun credit analyst, a loan processor, someone who's going to alleviate the pressure from you so you can start running and growing the business, right? Clear bonus structures as well. So One thing I notice is when I'm putting people through a process, they don't yet have it worked out how they're going to structure the bonuses. What that does is it shows people that there's uncertainty there, and it doesn't land well with potential candidates. Now, look, I have embedded my salary guide in here. Truth be told, I tried doing this in a previous time I presented this, and I opened it and it didn't go. It didn't open very well. So if anyone is interested, please reach out to me after watching this video, and I'm happy to share it with you. I could even put it down in the comments as well below. Now, we'll move on to the next slide from there. So these are actually, if anyone gets to read the salary guide, these are actually some boots on the ground ones that I've come across, and these are real businesses that are paying, so there's real structures in there. So look, firstly, what you need to do is you need to segment the roles based on revenue generating and revenue protecting. Your brokers, your loan writers and everything else, right? For the revenue protecting roles, you want to aim for a salary with a growth bonus tied to the overall growth of the business, or added incentives to push for activity, right? So dependent on the seniority of the role, I've seen people for really junior roles add bonuses, like if they book meetings, they'll get $20 or something like that. It keeps people active and it keeps them incentivized, because that's how you get the best out of people, right? Incentivizing them to do more. Now, the salary guide aggregated data from Seek, LinkedIn, and AI CRM. I use multiple other sources as well, but in that table we've got to the left, these are literally a handful of structures and businesses that I've worked with in the past 18 months. So to touch on EVP again before we go over them, the EVP dictates what you can pay from a salary perspective. So the size of your book, headcount, book value, assistance with marketing, all that stuff, again, that's what you should base what you can pay off, right? So to touch on an example we've got here for the 80k plus super plus 25 of upfronts, there's a team of 15 there in total. And they've got 2 credit managers, onshore CMs, offshore team. They've got an operations manager, a director that you can lean on, and a team of other brokers, right? So this model in theory allows the brokers to write high volumes as they don't need any admin support at all. The 2 other businesses as well that are paying 80k plus super plus upfronts and trails, they're top 5 businesses and have a huge book, right? So they can afford to do that. And it incentivizes people to stay longer, because the longer they stay, the bigger the trail, the quicker they pay down there for their seat for the year, ultimately until they don't cost the business anything. Now, with the comms brokers, there's a little bit more flexibility to be creative. Some businesses like to retain the trail. Some like to let the contractor keep it even after they leave. Some flip it 80-20 to 20-80 on the trail. Some don't, right? One size does not fit all. But my recommendation is always pay what you can pay what you can so you can afford to get who you need, right? Simple as that. Don't let the 10k over the course of a year let you lose a solid operator, right, to a mortgage choice business down the road. Side note here, long term, my opinion is find a way to give them ownership in the business, right? So equity and ownership is the ultimate retention base. It's the only way to keep people, because they're bought in and they feel like they own, and they do own, right, technically. But to get a little bit deeper on these retention strategies, right, and how we can engage people. So this is going to be a little bit fluffy in places, forgive me on that, but it's just the reality of how things are done. So looking at things aside from development, right? This is where your mindset needs to shift from business owner to business leader. So if any of you haven't read or haven't done any leadership courses, I would definitely advise you to do that, sorry. And the reason is, look, lots of people coming into broking have never been leaders in the business, right? They might have been relationship bankers that have looked after a portfolio, but they've never had to manage people, right? So getting the best out of people is not something that you can just turn on a switch and do. And look, believe me, it does pay dividends doing that training as well. But to cover off what retention really is, right? It's retaining good employees for the long haul, and it is a bit of maths and it's a bit of social science, right? So maths is remuneration and feeling valued from that angle. If someone's dangling a carrot of more money, truth be told, people might end up leaving. So you need to find a way over the term of them being there to work in offering them more money, right? The social science there, this is the ability to connect and build emotional employees with your relationships with your employees, right? So onboarding is a really good place to start with everything, right? It sets the tone for the whole relationship. Think of any bad onboarding experiences you've had, right? And I've heard some horror stories from the aggregators, but think about how it tarnished that relationship right out the gate, and it took a very, very long time to win that back. If you don't onboard people long, it is a real reason why people leave, and they probably won't be around for too long, right? So again, going back, flexibility with work hours is another one, right? I can't tell you how to do it, and I can't tell you if to do it or not. All I can say is other people are doing it, and the data tells us that's what people are looking for, right? So it's in your best interest to do it. Now, I do believe on the flip side, if you want to build a business with longevity, you do have to get a home base and you have to get people in there. Throwing data out the window, right? I've had countless conversations this year with people who need that face-to-face connection. So really do lean into this. Another one, celebrate success, right? Spend money on things, team days, nights out, things that bind people together and show them that they're really valued. And again, reward people for growing the business with you. Another thing as well, this is a big one, and people don't really get this nailed down, is build out an internal communication structure. I had someone ask me a question on this, what it looks like. And effectively what it is really is it's building out a way that the communication and information flows through the business, so that if you do scale the business, you can do that at scale. You don't want loan processors picking up the phone or coming over to you and asking, hey, how do you do this? You want to build a process out where they can kind of get that information, either pulling it from a database, pulling it from a portal, a learning portal, or even going speaking to colleagues more senior to them that you've put in place, right? Another one as well, don't micromanage people. You can keep people close by encouraging people to come and ask for help if they're absolutely not sure on something, but you have to put that trust in place. The two sides to micromanagement is it does people's head in as employees, but it also stops you from growing the business out too, right? So there's a double-edged sword, there's a double-sided coin there, and I think you really need to step away from doing it. One, build a culture of high performance and care, right? So do this by looking into yourself and literally saying, what am I bad at? What part of me is terrible? And how can I find someone who makes up for that? So looking at more development as a career, as a retention strategy, show people that you're invested in their development from day one and encourage it. So for me, myself, I try and do about 7 hours per week, reading, listening to podcasts, practicing, visualizing, all of that stuff, right? You're probably doing the same yourself. So I think encourage your staff to do it, get them bought into that mindset that you're in. And a really good way to do this is to give them a book that changed your life or your outlook and make them read it, right? And I know it sounds very Dead Poet Society, but it actually works, right? It shows people that you're interested in them and you want them to learn. And a great way to build real trust and engagement early on is to map out what you want their development to look like within the business. So what vision do you have and how do you get them to play their part into that? One thing I do have to add in development mapping is if you tell them you're going to do something at a certain time, keep to that, right? Don't kick it too far down the road, because this is a common theme that comes up in my candidate conversations. I was told that I was going to be a broker in 18 months, right? This was a senior credit analyst that had all the experience, the personality, everything. I was told I was going to be a broker under the business. It's just not happening. So they ended up wanting to leave, right? And that's why they come and spoke to me. One-to-ones as well, really good way to keep close to people and help them, I guess, show that you care. And don't just do this when things are going bad, right? Do it when things are going really good and celebrate the success with them in there, right? That's how you want to get it across. With learning, PD days are okay, right? But it's just a repeat of the same thing, in my opinion. Bring them along with you, but I wouldn't just be relying on that as their source of extracurricular activity, let's call it. And I would suggest spending money on training for them, right? So a lot of these businesses like Swish Sales, they do boot camps, right? And you can buy one ticket and you get a free ticket, so you can bring someone along with you, right? And I think it's really good to do that with your employees. Now, we are all naturally inquisitive as people, and I think we want to learn. So you have to feed that hunger with people to show them that they're really valued. I'm going to put this bit in the middle as well, right? I know that there's a darker side to this, and I know you might say, great, Joe, if I invest my time and money, what then, right? What if they piss off, right? It does happen, such is life, and we've all done it, from big organizations, small organizations. The devil is in the detail. So the detail being your recruitment process. This is what we're looking for, long-term alignment with people. It's not just someone coming in, being a knowledge taker and leaving. I call them, you got knowledge takers and you got money makers, right? Look for the money makers. On the topic of mentorship, right? This is really only possible when you're building it out at scale. And I'm not talking about MFAA, broker mentorship. I'm talking about having employees buddying and mentoring with people in the business, right? So here's why it's a good idea. Firstly, the experience it gives to the mentor is second to none, right? And you're also building them as a leader in the business. This is great side note for that person who you're developing to be your ops manager. Bonus points as well if you're bonus points if you want to do it and build trust with this person, and you want to spend a few days or a few times a week having them do that, right? Secondly, the cohesion it creates between the staff links them together to really enforce the team aspect. So that's a really good way of doing it. Now, let's talk about what to do if it does go wrong. And look, sometimes it does go wrong and there's absolutely no way of avoiding it. That being said, sometimes it's also not as black and white, right? They're showing serious potential, but there's gaps. Address them early on, right? Build out a performance management framework or a matrix and have someone experienced doing that help you out. I can help you out if you need help. Please reach out. The goal here with performance management is essentially to get them back firing, not to get them fired, right? You want people who are in the business performing. The cost of re-recruiting, the cost of someone not filling the seat is a lot more than it is of just putting that time in to get them back online. And how you do that is set achievable goals, right, over a minimum of at least 2 weeks. They address the gaps, where they need to be and how they can get there. Now, ultimately, sometimes you figure out it's not going to work, even with the training, the time, whatever it is. Now it's time to cut them loose. The keynote here is the way you handle situations like this, build credibility, and these people actually become champions of your business in rooms that you're not in. And it goes back to a recruitment process as well. Let people down gently. Don't waste people's time, right? You want people to leave that process going, Jesus, I really like that business. I wish I could have got the job there. No, I'm glad I didn't get that, right? So it's the same when people leave. Don't treat people like dirt. Show them that you care.